Hey, folks, welcome back to LettermenRow.com. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast brought to you by Buyers Automotive. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. That's Spencer Holbrook. We're talking stuff about Ohio State football recruiting. Spencer, we have bad stuff to talk about first. And this happened a few days ago, but, after a couple of days of letting it digest, it doesn't really feel any different. I mean, it seems like the Dasan McCullough decommitment was somewhat inevitable from the minute that his brother committed to Indiana 2 weeks ago. You thought that the way that Dasan had basically given everything to helping recruit the Ohio State recruiting class in the last year, that maybe it would be a harder decision. But ultimately, I guess family is family, and that is something you just don't get to walk away from.
Yeah, family wins out. Almost every time family is going to win out. When you think about Ohio State and the way, I think in the linebacker room, it's even evident. Al Washington turned down a defensive coordinator position because of his family. So, Ohio State preaches family in every corner of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. And so for a linebacker to say, hey, coach, I want to go play with my family, you can't really blame the kid. You can't really knock the kid. A lot of people are going to say, well, have fun winning, 6-7 games a year while Ohio State's winning Big Ten championships. Well, he's going to do that with his family. And so it's kind of hard to really say anything other than that. I think there's been a lot made about this decommitment, a lot made about this decision. There's really not much to really dissect with it. It's just a family decision, and you kind of have to respect it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody should harbor any ill will towards Dasan for the choice. It's certainly, it's easy for people on the outside looking in to be like, oh, that's a bad business decision. But hey, if Indiana goes out and wins 9-10 games a year with his family leading the charge, they're going to be like heroes in Bloomington forever. And Dasan was born in Cincinnati, but he did spend most of his youth growing up in Bloomington. It is sort of home for him. And, you just wish him well. We've had him on our shows multiple times. He's a great kid. I think that, it speaks actually a lot about him as a person to know that he felt like he had to make that difficult decision. But the good news is that he made it quickly. And because this could have lingered, right? This could have gone until December, and then you make the decision. And if that happens, then you leave Ohio State sort of in the lurch. And he didn't want that to happen. And he knew that if he wants to build the best Indiana recruiting class that he can, he had to get in early. So good luck to Dasan McCullough moving forward.
Yeah. And, it could have even happened down the road even further than that. And, play 1 year at Ohio State and then go play with your family. So it's not a decommitment is never good timing for Ohio State, but if there's going to be one, this is probably the ideal time to have one because the recruiting dead period's almost over. Everything's about to open back up for business, and you can start to nail down a couple potential replacements for Dasan McCullough.
And not to make, or to minimize it or make light of it, but if there's a guy in that linebacker group that is easier to replace, it's probably Dasan because he does not have necessarily what I would call a set position. I mean, he's still listed as a safety in his recruiting profiles. There's questions about whether or not he gets big enough to maybe put his hand in the ground. You don't know exactly from a linebacker perspective which role he fits. He's obviously a very talented player, a top 50 prospect right now, but that prospect is based on what he can become 4 or 5 years from now, not necessarily what he is right now. And right now, what he was for Ohio State was a positionless player with some question marks. And I've actually heard, Spencer, that there were some schools using the commitment of Dasan McCullough against Ohio State in the recruitment of Xavier Wampa, which is interesting, trying to convince Wampa that he and Dasan McCullough were being recruited for the same position, which is not true. But at the same time, Ohio State had to deal with that. And now, I guess, in a way, you don't have to. And you can eliminate any of those potential misdirections from other schools.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's two sides of that coin where, Dasan McCullough was active in the recruitment to Ohio State of Xavier Wampa. And so it's just interesting the dynamic that's going on the defensive side of the ball right now with Ohio State where they have to find a replacement for a positionless player, which you say, well, it might be easier because now you can just go find the best athlete to play defense, but it's just not that easy. And then you throw in the layer of, he was a great recruiter for Ohio State in this class, and it is a big loss for the class, but I think it's something that the Buckeyes can overcome, in relative short order.
One of the key elements of it, and I talked about it on Lettermen Live on Monday, was that for the last year, Ohio State thought that it had locked up its 3 linebacker targets for this class. And so you didn't really need to spend too much time building relationships elsewhere. Yeah, you kept things warm. You stayed in touch with players like Sean Murphy. You continued to recruit guys like Jalen Walker, who committed to Georgia. You continue to recruit guys like Jihad Campbell, who's a talented player that could be a defensive end or a linebacker. So you still keep some of the embers burning, but you certainly weren't like pushing things full-fledged into in fuego territory with anyone. Now you're in a position where you have to kind of make up the ground in recruitments where you had not really made any real attempt. On Monday on the website, I did write a couple names, and one of them was Michigan State commit Malik Spencer, who's from Buford High School down in Georgia. It's the high school that produced Harry Miller to Ohio State. It's the high school where Jake Pope, the 2022 safety, who's making an official visit to Ohio State, plays. So the Buckeyes have good relationships there, and they had reached out to Malik Spencer a little bit, even as far back as March. But then he committed to Michigan State, so you really weren't sure if it was worth the continued effort. I think he's a guy that they will continue to push to just try to build a relationship with, to see if there's any potential interest. I'd have to think there is. I've heard of some folks inside the Ohio State program who liken Malik Spencer's game, and you should go to the Huddle, folks, if you want to check it out, to Darren Lee. He kind of looks like him. If you go to my Monday story, you can see a photo of Malik Spencer from my most recent trip to Georgia. So you can kind of see that. But it tells me, Spencer, that the Buckeyes are looking for that hybrid type player as opposed to a traditional, 6'3", 235-pound linebacker, which is why when I see people in the Twitter sphere and in the rest of the recruiting world for Ohio State talking about Sean Murphy as now it's Sean Murphy's turn. I don't know that that's necessarily true, because I still don't know if that's the fit that they're looking for with Gabe Powers, who maybe could play that role already. I think that the interest in guys like Malik Spencer, and then there's a young guy who I wrote about on Tuesday in Dotting the I's, named Austin Brown from Illinois, who's another guy that is a 6'1", 200-pound safety / linebacker. These are the types of positions I think they're looking for. They're looking for those Court Williams types that can really fit the mold of playing that bullet position, which now all of a sudden seems to be a real thing.
Well, yeah, and when you look at the Ohio State roster, you've got two different avenues that bullet position can take. It can take the Craig Young and Ronnie Hickman route, a long guy who's kind of a tweener between a linebacker and a safety, who can, fly around the field, or it can be a little bit smaller guy who's not as long, but is still just as productive, if not more productive there, in Court Williams. So Ohio State, I don't think, is going to commit to a body type in that bullet role. I think it's just going to be whoever's the best athlete there. Dasan McCullough fit, in my opinion, what Craig Young can be for the defense, whereas, a Malik Spencer or an Austin Brown could be what Court Williams could be for this defense. And so I think there's a little bit of that, the positionless nature, but you see Ohio State not really choosing a body type, but really just getting both of those body types in there and then seeing which works the best in that position.
Yeah, we've talked about it a number of times. The Buckeyes are just looking for athletes. They're looking for the best players they can find. Austin Brown is a guy that runs like a 10.9 in the 100. He's very fast, and not to beat a dead horse, but he's a kid in Illinois who is now finally getting to have some junior film put on tape. And once you see that, you're going to see new names pop up. The Buckeyes offered Sherrod Koval from Virginia, who's another player, kind of more in that Ronnie Hickman role, I think. A few weeks ago, again, junior tape is now available. Omarion Hampton, the running back in North Carolina, the junior film is now available. So you're starting to see these offers come. And that's why, when we've talked in the last year about the decision to accept so many early commitments was a little bit of a risk, because you just don't know what is going to happen when everyone else is back to playing. And the Buckeyes have tried really hard in the last few months to maintain patience and to not force any offers or to accept any decisions from kids that maybe they weren't sure on. And now, as we head into May with June right around the corner, you're going to actually get a chance to get these kids on campus and get them in front of the coaches and let them get evaluated, let them run around. So a lot of these questions that are still out there are going to be answered in short order. And that really will make things a lot easier for Ohio State to figure out exactly what they want to replace Dasan McCullough. If we're looking at a traditional linebacker, you got maybe one like David Bailey out at Mater Dei High School. And we've talked about Mater Dei over and over and over again. And the Buckeyes still haven't found a way to land anyone from that school, which is probably the country's most talent-rich high school. And so you don't know. Maybe you make a push there and say, hey, David, you could be our guy. He's not underrated by any stretch, but he's a very different type of player. He does not even have a Twitter account. Like, is not someone interested in all the recruiting stuff. The buzz around him is that he's likely to stay home and either play at USC or even Cal is a big one that gets mentioned with him. But the Buckeyes are at least, getting a temperature check there to see about him. He's a 4-star, more of that traditional linebacker size. He's like the 6'3", 225 guy that people think of as a traditional outside linebacker. So there's just a lot of options and a lot of names that are going to keep popping up over the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I think there's even some guys, if you look in the top 100, 150, 200, there's even some guys that are not even on the radar right now at Ohio State. Well, they always are because they're top 200 players, but aren't really in the conversation for Ohio State. Once they make those visits and everything, Ohio State could start to creep into, good standing with some of these guys that are really, really talented and high 4-star, even 5-star guys. They just haven't gotten the chance to speak to Ohio State enough yet. And so I think not only are you going to see some of these under the radar guys start to creep up on Ohio State's board, you're going to see some of the already highly rated guys begin to really, Ohio State can really start to make a push for them once they get them on campus. It's fascinating how backlogged all of this recruiting stuff is right now.
Yeah. And that's why I think, and I've talked about it over and over, Ohio State's top choice at linebacker, even with the 3 guys committed, the top choice for who they would want to supplement Hicks, Powers, and McCullough was Jalen Walker out of North Carolina. That was the guy that they really had targeted and thought he was the right fit. He committed to Georgia kind of out of the blue. That surprised people. Maybe you can get an opportunity to get him back into the mix. I doubt it. Even if he does end up decommitting from Georgia, I think Clemson is the school that would be next in line. Again, Jihad Campbell, we've talked about. They felt that really good about Jihad Campbell when he was in New Jersey. And he went down to IMG and now doesn't even really list them in his top 5 or top 6. But I don't think that they're done trying. They're trying to figure out what happened to that relationship and what caused it to go kind of downhill relatively quickly. But maybe now that there's an opening, maybe now that there's more of a clear path to his role in the defense, maybe he's more receptive to the message. I'm not entirely sure. I have not talked to Jihad in a minute. So, there are names that we've talked about in the past again, and I don't want to discount the possibility of Sean Murphy being that guy. Sean Murphy does have family ties to Youngstown, Ohio. He's someone that Al Washington's continued to talk to and serve as sort of a mentor to over these last few months. I know that they talk of somewhat regularly and almost never about football. So there is an opportunity there. If Sean's a kid that wants to make a visit to Ohio State and work out for them and show them what he's done with his body in the last year, because, if we're calling a spade, Spencer, when we saw him last summer, he looked to me to be a step or 2 behind CJ Hicks as far as development. So you'd like to see if that's been addressed and how the last year has changed things for him. Especially because Virginia, he didn't even get to play a junior season because of a secondary COVID outbreak this spring. So their entire junior tape got wiped away anyway. So there are just tons of names, tons of opportunities, and we at Lettermen Row are going to continue to try to track them. But just stay patient, because that's what Ohio State has tried to do with the class in general.
There's just a lot happening at linebacker. And you look at this 2 weeks ago, Ohio State probably had the best collection of linebacker talent in the 2022 class in the country. Just, the 3 guys that they had. Now, all of these questions are starting to come back up on where do the Buckeyes turn. I hope that the people learn something from your, knowledge on the situation and the linebackers that Ohio State's going to go after. Sean Murphy's an interesting one to me. I think if he can gain that step back and can get back, get his body right, get his physical play right, everything like that. If he puts on a show in his senior year, I think if he's patient, then Ohio State can be patient and wait on him. I think that's probably a good fit if he takes those steps. But like you said, from what we saw out of him, CJ Hicks just looked to be a better player, and you don't want to be that, too blunt with a guy who was just coming off a sophomore year, but CJ Hicks just looked better.
Right. And that is the thing. I mean, what you said is perfectly spot on. If these players are willing to be patient, Ohio State's in a position now where they're going to be patient. They're not going to rush into a commitment from another linebacker unless it was a Jalen Walker or Jihad Campbell. That's pretty much the only guys that they'd be like, oh, yes, absolutely, right now, go ahead. And so now you have this time to sort of evaluate and to make sure that you're getting the right fit for the program and for the defense. And there's certainly going to be more names that pop up. And the thing is, Spencer, and I don't think this is going to happen for Ohio State. Of course, I didn't think Dasan McCullough was going to decommit 2 weeks ago, but I don't really think that there's any other players in the Ohio State class that are in jeopardy of, rescinding their verbal. I know that there's been a lot of talk from people about Jair Brown. That's continued for the last year since he committed. That's just a byproduct of who Jair is. He's a kid that likes to talk. He is not afraid to tell people what he's thinking. And like a lot of these kids, especially in the class of 2022, which, as I talked about with Chris McClellan on Bermanology on Monday, like the class of 2021 had the opportunity in the summer of 2019 to do camps and make visits. The class of 2023 has that opportunity this summer and next year. The class of 2022 got boned pretty hard. I mean, they got screwed. And so a lot of these kids are in a position now where they're like, hey, I can finally make some trips and see other schools. And even the ones that committed early, kids like Jair Brown especially, are probably going to take that opportunity to do so. Does that mean he's going to flip somewhere else? I don't think so. I think that there was a little bit of momentum building for Notre Dame in the last month plus, and he was supposed to make a visit there, a self-guided tour there in April, and didn't happen after his father passed away. And there's now a little bit of belief, I guess, from the Irish side of things that maybe that window of opportunity for them has closed a little bit. The simple truth of the matter is, outside of Quinn Ewers, Jaheim Singletary, CJ Hicks, Gabe Powers, maybe Bennett Christian, because of his just prowess as a recruiter and the fact that he's put so much on the line for Ohio State already, spurning his legacy at Tennessee, et cetera. I mean, I don't know if anyone's irreplaceable at this point. I mean, half the class, I guess I just named half the class. So I guess half the class is irreplaceable. But when you look at cornerback, for example, if Jair Brown decided to go elsewhere, Ohio State has a number of players that it's talking to and looking at corner, including guys like Ryan Turner and Toriano Pride and Austin Jordan. Like, there's a lot of guys out there that they could turn to. You don't offer a player like Jair Brown and take a commitment from him as early as they did if they didn't believe he was the right fit for the defense. But I don't think that there's going to be much sweating at Ohio State about anyone in this class, because the Buckeyes know where they are in the hierarchy of college football.
Yeah, and 99% of high school athletes that are being recruited by Division I programs are lining up and beating down the door of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center to play at Ohio State. And that's just the simple fact. Maybe it's 95%, but they're lining up at the door to play at Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Notre Dame, Oregon, the very top crop of schools, Oklahoma, I guess. So you don't worry about any of these guys really, but they also understand, they're in the class already. They should take that seriously. They should want to play at Ohio State. They're talented enough to. But you didn't even mention Caleb Burton in there, and that tells you a lot, because I don't think you mentioned Caleb Burton. I don't think he's irreplaceable either, because Brian Hartline is the best wide receivers coach in America, and most receivers want to play for him. So even if he were to do something, and he's not going to, but even if he were to do something, he's not irreplaceable. And so nobody in this class, other than probably, in my opinion, Quinn Ewers, is irreplaceable. Maybe Jaheim Singletary, but yeah.
Well, I think, like I said, I think CJ Hicks is on that level. I think CJ Hicks might be the most talented linebacker prospect in the country. Maybe that's a little bit of bias on my part because I've seen him so much. But if you watch CJ and you see CJ and the size and the speed and just the overall package that he brings, it's pretty special. And I think that obviously when you're talking about Quinn Ewers, that's the guy. I mean, he's the number one player in the country. He's been the number one ranked player in the country in his class for a year. There's no reason to think that's going to change. And I don't remember exactly who it was, and I apologize. I know I should be attributing it to someone. I saw a Twitter post. Somebody had an interview with Quinn where he said other schools have pretty much stopped calling because they know it's all Ohio State for him. And that has to just be a sweet, sweet sigh of relief for Corey Dennis and for Ryan Day. And what I think that they would really love, and if we're talking about what takes this class to the next level for Ohio State, it's got to be Quinn Ewers becoming more involved. When you lose a guy like Dasan McCullough, who's a very active, very vocal, very outgoing leader, at some juncture, the quarterback has to take over the class. And ironically, at Ohio State in the last few years, Jack Miller did a nice job, trying to orchestrate the class of 2020. He had a lot of help from Paris Johnson in Ohio, like CJ Hickson is doing in Ohio. But Kyle McCord and Quinn Ewers have just been very, very not involved in getting the class built. Kyle did his part once kids were in the class to build relationships and stuff like that. But if you contrast that to what Caleb Williams did at Oklahoma, if you contrast that to what Malachi Nelson, the class of 2023 5-star, who I talked to last week, who said that he wants to commit early, he wants to commit this summer to probably Clemson, Oklahoma, or USC, because he wants every receiver in the country to come with him. These quarterbacks, especially when you're one on the level of Quinn Ewers, it might not be comfortable and it may not be in his entire nature, but just him being the face of the program, him being the face of the recruiting class, and him being the leader of as far as going out and saying, hey, you're my guy, you're someone I want to play alongside me. Quinn Ewers has a bigger impact on Keontae Goodwin, for example, than pretty much anyone else could. I mean, that's just those bonds are so important. And when you lose a Dasan McCullough, you need to have someone like Quinn Ewers step up.
Yeah, and I think that could change. I think once Quinn gets on campus and he meets with Ryan Day and they go over, whatever they need to go over on his official visit in June, you might see a little bit of a change in him. Maybe he does start to become more of that upfront face-to-face recruiter. You might see him, reach out to some more guys. I think that there is some power in what Ryan Day says to him whenever they have that face-to-face meeting. And so I think you could see a little bit of a shift. But at the same time, I know that it's super important to get this class built. You can't really change who you are.
Yeah,
and he's not a very outspoken person. He's not a very vocal person. And that's probably tough to just say, hey, you have to do this now because you're committed to Ohio State. That puts a lot of pressure on him. That puts a lot of pressure on, other guys. If Quinn Ewers is to reach out to him, It's an interesting balance. It's like a tightrope act that Ohio State's going to have to walk here because, like you said, they need Quinn Ewers to become a more vocal leader in this class because they just need the number one prospect. The guy who's got a 1.000 rating has to be a big part of the recruiting pitch. But if he doesn't want to talk and if he doesn't really feel like being out there and being the face of everything, you can't really change what he is.
Yeah, and it's not that Quinn is shy even. It's just he's just rather do other things. He'd rather, he committed, he can go about his life and be a high school kid, which is refreshing on one hand. But we're talking about the recruiting class and how it gets built, and those are things that can really change a dynamic in a class, especially again when you lose a player like Dasan McCullough, who was so comfortable doing that. But as we head into the summer, we're just about 5 weeks away now from all 10 of those commitments being on campus on the weekend of June 4th. It's a real opportunity for Ohio State to kind of regroup and figure out exactly where to go. They're now the number 3 ranked class in the country behind Georgia and LSU. And I don't care. I don't think Buckeyes fans should care. I mean, I know you always want to be number 1, and you always want to win whatever you're competing in. The sooner we can all step back and realize Ohio State, to ever finish as the number 1 class in the country, is going to have to pull off some amazing, amazing stuff because they just simply are in a different world than the SEC in a lot of ways. And so you need to finish with a top 3 or 4 class every single year. And the Buckeyes are going to do that year in and year out under Ryan Day. So it's just about finding out who the best fit is and making sure that now that you have June coming up and you have the opportunity to evaluate kids in person, you have the ability to camp, making sure that you're not bringing anyone on board that can't play at Ohio State. because it's not the players that you miss on that matter. It's the guys you hit on that don't pan out that are the biggest issue in recruiting. So it's been very much trust the tape in the last year plus for the Buckeyes, and as we start to ramp up towards June, you're going to start to see a number of new names and new faces and things that are changing in the class. But I don't expect any of the current group of the 10 commitments will change.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I think that's a good place to leave the people.
We'll leave you people. This has been Talking Stuff, the Ohio State Recruiting Podcast, brought to you by Lettermen Row and Buyers Automotive. That's Spencer Holbrook. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. Please stay with us at lettermenrow.com and our YouTube channel for all the latest on Ohio State football and Buckeyes recruiting. Thanks for watching.